Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he finished checking the last atmospheric processor for the day. The machine hummed quietly in the afternoon heat of New Eden. The red sun was getting lower in the sky, and Jake knew he should head back to Haven Creek soon. The human settlement would be preparing for dinner, and he was tired after working all day. New Eden was not like Earth. The sky was more orange than blue, and there were 2 moons that could be seen even during the day. The trees were taller, and their leaves were silver instead of green. But Jake had lived here for 8 years now, and it felt like home. The air was clean, and the work was good. Most importantly, the humans got along well with the natives who lived here first. The Zelthani were different from humans in many ways. Their skin looked like it was made of smooth crystal that changed colors when they felt strong emotions. They were taller than most humans but thinner. Their eyes were much larger, and they seemed to glow softly in the dark. At first the human colonists had been nervous about living so close to aliens, but the Zelthani turned out to be peaceful people who just wanted to live their lives in peace. Jake picked up his tool box and started walking toward the path that led back to Haven Creek. The human settlement was built near a small river and had about 300 people living there. They had farms and workshops, and even a small school for the children. Life was simple, but good. Jake worked as an engineer, keeping all the machines running that helped both the humans and Zelthani survive on this world. As he walked along the forest path, Jake heard a soft crying sound coming from behind some large rocks. He stopped and listened carefully. The sound came again, and it sounded like a child was upset about something. Jake set down his toolbox and walked toward the rocks to see what was wrong. Behind the rocks he found a small Zelthani child sitting on the ground. The child looked very young, and their crystal skin was flashing bright red and orange colors, which Jake knew meant they were scared or sad. The child looked up at Jake with those big glowing eyes and made a soft whistling sound that Jake recognized as Zelthani crying. Jake had learned some basic Zelthani words during his years on New Eden. He was better at understanding them than most humans because he spent time fixing machines near their village. The Zelthani children often watched him work, and over time he had picked up their simple hand signals and a few spoken words. Jake knelt down slowly so he would not scare the child more. He held out his empty hands to show he was not dangerous. In his basic Zelthani he said, the word that meant safe or okay. The child stopped crying and looked at him with curiosity. Jake could see this was a very young Zelthani, maybe the same age as a human 5-year-old. The child made some whistling sounds and pointed toward the Zelthani village of Shimmer Falls. Jake understood that the child was lost and wanted to go home. Jake had been to Shimmer Falls many times to work on the water purification systems there. He knew the way well, and it was not far from where they were now. Jake stood up slowly and gestured for the child to follow him. He picked up his toolbox and started walking toward Shimmer Falls. The child got up and walked beside him, making soft, happy sounds. Jake was glad he could help. The Zelthani were good neighbors, and he knew any human child would get the same help from them. As they walked, Jake tried to talk to the child using the few Zelthani words he knew. The child seemed to understand, and even giggled at Jake's bad pronunciation. Jake learned that the child's name was something that sounded like Kess. Jake told the child his name was Jake, and Kess tried to say it back, which made them both laugh. The walk to Shimmer Falls took about 20 minutes. The Zelthani village was built around a beautiful waterfall that gave the place its name. The buildings were made from the same crystal-like material as Zelthani's skin, and they seemed to glow softly in the evening light. Jake had always thought it was one of the prettiest places on New Eden. When they reached the village, several adult Zelthani came running toward them. One of them was clearly Kess's mother, because she made happy whistling sounds and hugged the child tightly. Her skin flashed bright blue and green colors, which Jake knew meant joy and relief. She looked at Jake, and her skin became a warm golden color, which meant gratitude. The mother, whose name Jake learned was Verena, spoke to him in careful English. Most Zelthani could speak some human language, just like Jake could speak some Zelthani words. She thanked Jake many times for bringing Kes home safely. She explained that Kes had wandered off while playing, and they had been very worried. Other Zelthani adults gathered around, and Jake recognized some of them from his work in their village. They all seemed very happy that he had helped Kes. One of the elders made the formal Zelthani gesture of friendship toward Jake, which was a great honor. Jake made the gesture back as best he could, which made everyone whistle with approval. As Jake prepared to leave and walk back to Haven Creek, Kes came up to him and made a soft sound. The child reached out and touched Jake's hand very gently. Zelthani children were usually shy around humans, but Kes seemed to trust Jake completely. Varuna watched this with interest, and her skin flashed several colors that Jake did not recognize. Jake said goodbye in Zelthani and started walking home. Behind him, he could hear the Zelthani talking among themselves in their whistling language. He thought he heard his name mentioned several times, but he did not understand most of what they were saying. Jake was just happy he had been able to help. When Jake got back to Haven Creek, the sun had set, and the 2 moons were rising in the orange sky. He went to his small house near the edge of town and made himself dinner. As he ate, he thought about little Kes and how the child had not been afraid of him. Most Zelthani children were nervous around humans at first, but Kes had trusted him right away. Jake went to bed that night feeling good about his day. He had fixed 3 atmospheric processors and helped a lost child get home safely. It was the kind of day that made him glad he had chosen to live on New Eden. He had no idea that this simple act of kindness would soon change everything for both humans and Zelthani on their shared world. 3 months had passed since Jake helped little Kes find the way home. Life on New Eden had continued as normal until the morning when everything changed. Jake was eating breakfast when his communication device started making urgent beeping sounds. The voice of Administrator Lisa Parker came through the speaker, telling all citizens to stay calm, but be ready for important news. Jake quickly finished his meal and walked to the town center, where a crowd was already gathering. Lisa Parker stood on the small platform they used for community meetings. She was a strong woman in her 40s who had been chosen to lead Haven Creek because she was good at making hard decisions. Today she looked worried in a way Jake had never seen before. Lisa raised her hand for quiet and began to speak. She told them that the deep space sensors had detected a large group of ships approaching New Eden. The ships were still far away, but they were definitely coming toward their world. The ships were much bigger than any human vessels, and they were not responding to communication attempts. Lisa said they had contacted Earth Command, but help was very far away. The crowd started talking loudly with worry and fear in their voices. Jake felt his stomach tighten as he realized what this might mean. New Eden was a peaceful world with no military defenses. If these unknown ships had bad intentions, there was very little the colonists could do to protect themselves. Lisa called for volunteers to help prepare the settlement for whatever might come. Jake immediately stepped forward, along with many others. They spent the rest of the day checking emergency supplies and making sure all the important systems were working properly. Jake worked with the other engineers to make sure the power generators and communication systems would keep running, even if there was trouble. That evening, Lisa met with Elder Yondar, who was the leader of the Zelthani at Shimmer Falls. The meeting was held in the community center and several humans and Zelthani attended. Jake was there because of his engineering knowledge and his ability to communicate with the Zelthani better than most humans. Elder Yondar was very old, even by Zelthani standards. His crystal skin had a deep silver color that came with great age and wisdom. He spoke English well and had always been a good friend to the human colonists. Tonight, his usual calm manner seemed troubled. The meeting had been going on for about an hour when they heard voices outside. The door opened and Varuna entered with little Kes holding her hand. Varuna looked upset and was speaking quickly in Zelthani to Elder Yondar. Jake could only understand a few words, but he could tell something was very wrong. Kes looked around the room with those big glowing eyes until they saw Jake. The child immediately let go of Verena's hand and walked straight toward him. Jake smiled at Kes and was about to say hello when something strange happened. Kes stopped right in front of Jake and stared at him with an expression Jake had never seen before. The child's crystal skin began flashing colors very rapidly. Red and gold and blue and silver, all mixed together in patterns that Jake did not recognize. Kes made a soft whistling sound and turned to look at Verena. Then, in a voice so quiet that everyone had to lean forward to hear, Kes whispered something in Zel, Thani. Jake saw Verena's eyes grow even larger than normal. Her skin went completely white, which Jake had never seen before. She made a gasping sound and took a step backward. Elder Yandar stood up quickly and began speaking to Verena in rapid Zelthani. Other Zelthani in the room started whistling excitedly among themselves. Lisa Parker looked confused and a little annoyed. She asked what was happening and why everyone seemed so upset. Jake was wondering the same thing. Kes had pointed at him while whispering to Verena, but Jake could not understand what the child had said. All he knew was that it had caused a very strong reaction from all the Zelthani present. Elder Yandar raised his hand for silence. The old Zelthani looked at Jake for a long moment before speaking. He said that Kes had just told Verena something very important. The child had said, "That's him, Mom," while pointing at Jake. This might not seem like much to humans, but it meant something very different to the Zel. Thani. Verona stepped forward and looked directly at Jake. Her skin was still flashing white and silver colors. In her careful English, she said that her child could see things that other Zelthani could not see. Kes could see what she called the echo of someone who had come before. Jake felt more confused than ever. He asked what this echo meant and why everyone seemed so frightened. Lisa Parker also demanded an explanation. She said they had more important things to worry about, with unknown ships coming toward their world. Elder Yandar looked around the room at both humans and Zelthani. He seemed to be making a difficult decision about something. Finally, he spoke in a voice that sounded very tired and very old. He said there were things about Zelthani history that they had never told the humans, things that had been kept secret for many generations. He explained that some Zelthani children were born with a special gift. They could see memories that belonged to their ancestors. These memories were passed down through their family lines like stories, but much more real and clear. Most of the time these memory echoes were about normal things from the past, but sometimes they showed important events that had shaped Zelthani history. Elder Yandar said that Kes had this gift very strongly. The child could see memory echoes going back many generations. When Kes looked at Jake, the child saw an echo from long ago. An echo of someone who looked like Jake but lived in the distant past. Someone who had been very important to the Zelthani people. Jake listened to this explanation with growing amazement. He had always known the Zelthani were different from humans, but he had never imagined they could see genetic memories. He asked Elder Yandar what this ancient person had done that was so important. The old Zelthani was quiet for a long moment. Around the room, both humans and Zelthani waited to hear what he would say. Outside they could hear the normal sounds of evening on New Eden, but inside the community center everything was silent and tense. Finally, Elder Yandar began to speak. He told them about something that had happened to the Zelthani people long before humans ever came to New Eden. It was a story that few Zelthani knew, and none had ever shared with humans before. But now, with unknown ships approaching their world, he felt it was time to reveal the truth. He said that long ago, the Zelthani had faced a great disaster. Their world was dying, and their people were in danger of becoming extinct. But at their darkest hour, a stranger had appeared. A being who looked different from any Zelthani. A being who had pale skin and small eyes, just like humans. This stranger had saved the Zelthani people, and then disappeared as mysteriously as he had come. Jake felt a chill run down his spine as he realized what Elder Yondar was saying. The ancient savior of the Zelthani had been human, but that was impossible, because humans had only been on New Eden for 10 years. How could a human have helped the Zelthani centuries ago? Elder Yondar looked directly at Jake as he finished speaking. He said that Kes could see the echo of that ancient savior when looking at Jake. Not because Jake was the same person, but because Jake was the same kind of being. The child recognized Jake as one of the helper people from the old stories. The room fell completely silent as everyone tried to understand what this meant. Elder Yondar looked around the room at the faces of humans and Zelthani, who were all waiting to hear more. Jake could feel his heart beating faster as he tried to understand what the old Zelthani leader was telling them. The idea that a human had helped the Zelthani centuries ago seemed impossible, but Elder Yondar spoke with the certainty of someone telling the absolute truth. The elderly Zelthani moved slowly to the center of the room. His crystal skin had taken on a deep blue color that Jake had learned meant he was remembering something important. Elder Yondar began to speak in a voice that carried the weight of many years and much wisdom. He told them that long ago, New Eden had been a very different world. The sun had been cooler, and the planet was slowly freezing. The Zelthani people lived in great crystal cities that used the warmth from deep underground to stay alive. But something had gone wrong far beneath the surface of their world. The heat from the planet's core was failing, and their people were dying. The Zelthani had tried everything they could think of to fix the problem. Their best engineers and scientists worked day and night, but they could not find a way to restart the failing core systems. Food became scarce as the surface of the world grew too cold for their crops. Many Zelthani died during the harsh winters that seemed to grow longer each year. Elder Yondar said that the Zelthani leaders had given up hope. They began preparing for the end of their civilization. Parents held their children close and sang the old songs one last time. The crystal cities grew dark and cold as the underground heat sources failed, one by one. It seemed that the Zelthani people would join the many other species that had vanished from the universe. But then on the darkest day of their darkest season, a stranger appeared in their largest city. He looked nothing like any being the Zelthani had ever seen. His skin was pale instead of crystal. His eyes were small and dark instead of large and glowing. He walked on 2 legs like a Zelthani, but he was built differently, stronger and more solid. The stranger could not speak their language at first, but he learned quickly. He studied their failing machines and asked many questions about how their world worked. The Zelthani were amazed by his curiosity and his ability to understand complex problems. Most importantly, he did not seem afraid of their dying world or their desperate situation. Elder Yondar paused in his story and looked directly at Jake. He said that the stranger had the same kind of mind that Jake showed when fixing their machines. He could see problems that others missed and find solutions that no one else had thought of. The stranger worked alongside Zelthani engineers like a partner instead of trying to take charge like a conqueror. The room was completely quiet as Elder Yondar continued his tale. He said that the stranger had brought with him knowledge of technologies that the Zelthani had never imagined. He showed them how to build new kinds of machines that could reach deep into their planet's core. He taught them ways to redirect energy that should have been impossible. Working together, the stranger and the Zelthani engineers built great devices that could restart their world's failing heart. It took many seasons of hard work, but slowly, the underground heat began to flow again. The crystal cities grew warm and bright. Crops began to grow in the surface regions that had been frozen for generations. Jake listened to this story with growing amazement. He tried to imagine what it would be like to arrive on a dying world and somehow find a way to save an entire civilization. The technical challenges alone would have been incredible. But even more impressive was the idea that this ancient human had worked as an equal partner with the Zelthani. instead of trying to dominate them. Elder Yondar said that the stranger stayed with them for several years after saving their world. He continued to teach them new technologies and help them rebuild their civilization to be stronger than before. The Zelthani children especially loved the strange visitor. He seemed to understand young minds in a way that even adult Zelthani sometimes found difficult, but the stranger also seemed sad about something he could not or would not explain. Sometimes the Zelthani would find him staring up at the stars with an expression of deep longing. When they asked him about his own people, he would only say that he was very far from home and could never return. Then one day the stranger was gone. He left no message and took nothing with him. The Zelthani searched for him but found no trace of where he had gone. Some believed he had found a way to return to his own people among the stars. Others thought he had simply walked into the wilderness to die in peace. No one knew for certain what had happened to their savior. Elder Yondar explained that the Zelthani had kept the memory of their mysterious helper alive through their genetic memory system. The strongest memories were passed down from parents to children through their unique biology. Over the centuries, the story had become more legend than history. Many young Zelthani thought it was just an old tale told to make them feel better about difficult times. But Kes was different. The child's genetic memory was unusually strong and clear. When Kes looked at Jake, the child could see the echo of that ancient savior. Not Jake himself, but the same type of being, the same species that had once saved the Zelthani from extinction. Lisa Parker had been listening to this incredible story with obvious disbelief. She interrupted Elder Yondar to ask how any of this could be true. Humans had only been traveling in space for a few centuries. They had only reached New Eden 10 years ago. How could a human have been here saving the Zelthani long before that? Elder Yondar admitted he did not know how it was possible. All he knew was what had been passed down through their genetic memories. The stranger who saved them had looked exactly like the humans who now lived alongside them. The child Kes could see this connection clearly, even if the adults could not understand it. Jake felt a strange chill as he thought about the implications of Elder Yondar's story. Could a human really have traveled back in time somehow and saved the Zelthani centuries ago? It sounded like science fiction, but Jake knew that many things about space travel were still mysteries to human science. Before anyone could ask more questions about the ancient story, Elder Yondar raised his hand for attention. He said there was something else they needed to know, something that might be very important, given the approaching ships that threatened their world. The old Zelthani leader moved to a storage cabinet and withdrew a small crystal device that seemed to glow with its own inner light. He handled it very carefully, as if it was extremely precious and also potentially dangerous. Elder Yondar explained that this was one of several devices left behind by the ancient stranger. The Zelthani had kept these mysterious artifacts for generations but had never been able to understand how they worked. The technology was far beyond anything their people could create even now. They had been afraid to experiment with the devices because they seemed to contain enormous amounts of energy. Elder Yondar looked at Jake with an expression of desperate hope. He said that perhaps Jake could understand these ancient machines in a way that no Zelthani ever could. After all, if the devices had been created by one of Jake's people, then maybe Jake could unlock their secrets. Jake stared at the glowing crystal device and felt the weight of history pressing down on him. Jake stared at the crystal device in Elder Yondar's hands and felt overwhelmed by what he was being asked to do. The glowing artifact looked both beautiful and dangerous. He could sense that it contained technology far beyond anything he had ever worked with before. But with unknown ships approaching their world, he knew they needed every possible advantage before Jake could examine the device more closely. The communication system in the community center began making loud warning sounds. Lisa Parker rushed to answer the emergency call. The voice that came through the speakers belonged to the sensor technician who monitored space around New Eden. His words made everyone in the room freeze with fear. The unknown fleet had arrived, much sooner than expected. Dozens of massive ships now hung in space above their world. The vessels were unlike anything in human databases. They were huge and clearly built for war. Weapons could be seen mounted all over their dark hulls. Most frightening of all, the ships had begun broadcasting a message toward the surface of New Eden. Lisa quickly activated the main communication screen, so everyone could see and hear what the invaders wanted. The image that appeared showed a being that was clearly not human or Zelthani. It had gray skin covered in scales, and multiple eyes that glowed red in its elongated skull. When it spoke, its voice was harsh and filled with contempt. The creature identified itself as Commander Vex of the Hegemony Fleet. It said that New Eden now belonged to the Hegemony, and all inhabitants would submit to their rule or be destroyed. The colonists had exactly 24 hours to surrender completely. Any resistance would result in the death of every living thing on the planet. To demonstrate their power, one of the Hegemony ships fired a massive energy beam down at an empty forest area. The blast was visible from the community center as a bright flash followed by a mushroom cloud of smoke and fire. Where the forest had been, there was now only a smoking crater several miles wide. The message was clear. The Hegemony had the power to destroy their entire world, if they chose to. After the transmission ended, the room erupted in frightened voices. Some people wanted to surrender immediately rather than face certain death. Others argued that surrendering to aliens like Commander Vex would be a fate worse than death. Everyone looked to Lisa Parker and Elder Yondar for leadership, but even they seemed overwhelmed by the situation. Lisa tried to contact Earth Command, but the response was not encouraging. The nearest human military fleet was months away from New Eden. By the time help could arrive, the Hegemony would have complete control of the planet. The human colonists had mining equipment and construction tools, but nothing that could fight warships designed for conquering worlds. Jake realized that their only hope might be the mysterious devices left by the ancient human savior. He asked Elder Yondar if there were more artifacts like the one he had shown them. The old Zelthani nodded and said there were several devices hidden in secure vaults beneath Shimmer Falls. No. Zelthani had dared to activate them because they did not understand the technology. Elder Yondar led a small group including Jake and Lisa Parker through secret tunnels beneath the Zelthani village. The tunnels were carved from the same crystal material as their buildings and seemed to glow with soft light. Deep underground they reached a chamber that had been sealed for centuries. Inside the hidden vault, Jake saw the most amazing collection of technology he had ever encountered. There were devices that looked like weapons but were sleek and elegant, instead of crude and threatening. Other machines seemed designed for defense with complex arrays of crystal and metal components. Most mysterious of all was a large central device that pulsed with energy patterns Jake had never seen before. Elder Yondar explained that these were all the artifacts left behind by the ancient stranger. The Zelthani had kept them safe, but had never dared to use them. The technology was so advanced that they feared causing disasters if they activated the devices incorrectly. Jake approached the nearest weapon-like device and studied its construction carefully. The design was definitely not Zelthani. It had the logical engineering patterns that he recognized from human technology, but it was far more advanced than anything Earth science could create. The materials alone were beyond current human capabilities. As Jake examined the devices more closely, he began to see familiar principles in their design. The energy flow patterns made sense to his engineering mind, even though the technology was centuries ahead of anything he had worked with before. It was as if the machines had been built by someone who thought like a human engineer, but had access to much more advanced knowledge. Working through the night, Jake managed to understand the basic operating principles of several devices. The weapons were actually mining lasers that had been modified with focusing crystals to increase their power dramatically. The defensive systems created energy barriers by manipulating the same forces that kept atoms together. Everything was designed to be operated by someone with human-level intelligence and Hume-style problem-solving abilities. Lisa Parker helped Jake gather volunteers from both the human and Zelthani communities to assist with preparing the ancient technology for use. The Zelthani were especially helpful because they could grow and shape the crystal components needed to complete some of the devices. Their natural ability to work with crystalline structures made them perfect partners for activating the ancient machines. As the sun rose on what might be their last day of freedom, Jake had managed to get several defensive shield generators working. The modified mining lasers were mounted on the highest points around both settlements. Most importantly, he had begun to understand the central device, which seemed to be some kind of communication system. The shield generators created shimmering barriers of energy around Haven Creek and Shimmer Falls. Jake tested the shields with small tools and found they could stop almost any kind of impact or energy beam. The modified weapons had incredible range and power. They could probably damage even the massive hegemony warships if used correctly. But Jake knew their improvised defenses would not be enough against an entire fleet of military vessels. The hegemony had dozens of ships and could simply overwhelm their limited defenses through sheer numbers. They needed help from somewhere else if they were going to survive. The central communication device was the most complex of all the ancient artifacts. Jake spent hours studying its intricate design before he began to understand what it was meant to do. The device was not just a communication system, it was something much more advanced. A quantum beacon that could send signals across vast distances of space and time. As the 24-hour deadline approached, Jake made a desperate decision. He activated the quantum beacon not knowing what would happen or who might receive its signal. The device sent out a pulse of energy, unlike anything Jake had ever seen. The pulse seemed to twist space itself as it raced away from New Eden at impossible speeds. Above them in orbit, Commander Vex was preparing to demonstrate hegemony power by destroying one of the settlements. But Jake's activation of the quantum beacon had just changed the rules of the game in ways that no one could have predicted. Help was coming from a place and time that should not have been possible. The quantum beacon's pulse had barely faded when Commander Vex's voice crackled through the communication systems again. The 24-hour deadline had expired, and the hegemony commander was ready to show the colonists what happened to worlds that refused to surrender. Jake watched the main screen as the alien warships moved into attack positions. Above their settlements, Jake stood in the makeshift command center they had set up in the community building. Around him, both human and Zelthani volunteers waited nervously at the controls of the ancient defensive systems. The shield generators were humming with power, and the modified mining lasers were aimed at the sky. Everyone knew they were about to face impossible odds, but no one was willing to give up without a fight. The first attack came without warning. Massive energy beams lanced down from 3 different hegemony ships, targeting both Haven Creek and Shimmer Falls. The colonists held their breath as the deadly weapons struck their energy barriers. For a moment it seemed like the shields might fail under the incredible assault. The barriers flickered and sparked as they absorbed energies that could have destroyed entire city blocks. But the ancient technology held firm. The shield generators that Jake had activated using the mysterious artifacts proved to be far more powerful than anyone had dared to hope. The hegemony weapons that should have wiped out both settlements were completely stopped by the shimmering energy barriers. Commander Vex's voice could be heard cursing in his alien language as his initial attack failed. Jake did not wait for the enemy to recover from their surprise. He gave the signal, and the modified mining lasers opened fire on the hegemony fleet. The weapons that had once been used to cut through solid rock now sent focused beams of incredible power up toward the orbiting warships. The colonists cheered as several smaller enemy vessels were hit and began trailing smoke and debris. Jake knew their early success would not last long. The hegemony had dozens of ships and they were already adapting their tactics. More warships moved into position to bombard the settlements from different angles. Commander Vex was learning that the colonists had defenses he had not expected, but he still had overwhelming numerical superiority. The battle continued for hours with the colonists managing to hold their ground against impossible odds. The ancient shield generators kept their settlements safe, while the modified weapons continued to damage enemy ships. Several hegemony vessels had been destroyed or forced to retreat, but many more remained. Jake could see that their defensive systems were beginning to show signs of strain under the constant bombardment. Lisa Parker worked alongside Jake, coordinating the defense efforts. She had proven to be an excellent leader during the crisis, keeping everyone focused on their tasks, even as the sky above them filled with the light of weapon fire. The Zelthani volunteers had been especially brave, using their natural abilities to repair and modify the crystal components of the ancient devices during the battle. Elder Yandar approached Jake during a brief lull in the fighting. The old Zelthani looked tired but determined. He told Jake that the children, including little Kes, had been moved to the deepest shelters beneath Shimmer Falls. Even if the worst happened, the next generation of both species might survive to carry on their peoples. Legacy. Jake was about to respond when something incredible happened. Space near New Eden suddenly twisted and distorted, as if reality itself was being bent out of shape. The distortion grew larger and brighter until it hurt to look at directly. Then, with a flash that lit up the entire system, a massive human warship dropped out of hyperspace right in the middle of the hegemony fleet. The ship was larger than any of the enemy vessels, and its hull gleamed with advanced armor and weapons systems. Jake could see the name painted on its side in large letters. UES Defiance. It was a human dreadnought of a class that Jake had never seen before. The warship looked decades more advanced than any vessel Earth Command had possessed when he left. For New Eden. Commander. Vex's surprised voice came through the communication system as he demanded to know where the human ship had come from. The response came from the Defiance's captain, whose calm professional tone was a sharp contrast to the alien commander's angry shouts. Captain Ryan Clark identified himself and politely suggested that the hegemony fleet leave the New Eden system immediately. Commander Vex responded with threats and curses. He claimed that one human ship could not stand against his entire fleet. Captain Clark's reply was brief and to the point. The Defiance opened fire with weapons that made the colonists' modified mining lasers look like toys. Beams of pure energy lanced out from the human dreadnought and began systematically destroying hegemony warships with devastating precision. The battle that followed was unlike anything Jake had ever imagined. The Defiance moved through the enemy fleet like a hunter among prey. Its advanced weapons and defenses made it clear that human military technology had advanced far beyond what the colonists remembered. Ship after ship of the hegemony force was either destroyed or disabled in a matter of minutes. Commander Vex realized his fleet was being annihilated in order to retreat. But before the surviving hegemony ships fled the system, he sent one final transmission. His words were filled with hatred and promised that this defeat would not be forgotten. The hegemony would return with even more ships, and the humans would pay dearly for their interference. After the enemy fleet had jumped away to hyperspace, Captain Clark contacted the surface. He requested permission to send down a shuttle to meet with the colonial leadership. Jake found himself included in the small group that would represent both humans and Zelthani. In talks with the mysterious captain who had saved their world, Captain Clark turned out to be a man in his 50s, with graying hair and the bearing of someone used to command. He listened carefully as Jake and the others explained about the ancient artifacts and how they had managed to defend themselves until help arrived. The captain seemed particularly interested in Jake's description of the quantum beacon that had sent out the distress signal. Clark explained that his ship had been testing experimental hyperspace drives when they received Jake's beacon signal. The quantum transmission had used technology that should not exist for centuries according to current human science. The signal had created a temporary gateway through space and time that allowed the Defiance to reach New Eden in hours instead of months. Jake asked how this was possible, and Clark's answer changed everything. Jake thought he knew about the situation. The captain explained that the quantum beacon had not just sent a signal across space. It had sent a signal across time as well. The Defiance was not from Jake's present. It was a ship from humanity's future that had been pulled back through time by the ancient beacon. Elder Yondar listened to this explanation with growing excitement. He said that this proved the truth of the old Zelthani legends. The ancient stranger who had saved their people centuries ago must have been a time traveler as well. Perhaps the same kind of accident that brought Captain Clark back in time had also stranded the original human helper in the distant past. Captain Clark nodded and revealed the final piece of the puzzle. Earth Command had records of an mission that had gone wrong centuries earlier. A ship called the Endeavor had vanished during tests of an early quantum drive. The ship's commander had been Captain Alex Chen, a brilliant engineer who had volunteered for the dangerous mission. Jake realized that Alex Chen must have been the ancient stranger who saved the Zelthani. The captain had been thrown back in time by his ship's accident and had spent the rest of his life helping the people of New Eden. The technology he left behind was based on scientific principles that humanity would not discover for generations to come. As Captain Clark prepared to return to his ship, he made Jake an offer that would change both their worlds forever. The technology Jake had successfully used to defend New Eden represented centuries of advancement beyond current human capabilities. If Jake was willing to work with Earth Command's scientists, they could accelerate human technological development by generations. Jake looked around at the settlement he had helped save, and the Zelthani friends who had become like family to him. Little Kess ran up to him and took his hand with complete trust. The child who had recognized him as one of the helper people was right. Jake had become the newest link in a chain of human protectors that stretched across time itself. Jake smiled at Kess and made his decision. He would work with Captain Clark to unlock the secrets of the ancient technology. But he would also stay on New Eden to continue protecting both humans and Zelthani as they faced the challenges that lay ahead. The hegemony would return eventually, and when they did, humanity would be ready for them. The story ended as it had begun, with a simple act of human kindness, rippling forward through time to save entire civilizations. Jake Morrison had no idea that helping one lost child would lead to humanity gaining the tools they would need to defend themselves among the stars. But then again, the best heroes never do know how far their good deeds will reach.